Hey, if you were here last week, Caleb reintroduced himself because he got his head shaved. Right? Wanted to make sure that you all recognized him. I feel like I need to reintroduce myself as well because we have just been so everywhere over the summer. We had a new grandson who was born. Our other son, Micah, and his wife, Kayla, moved to Savannah. We've kind of helped a couple times down there. I spent 3 of 4 weekends back to back to almost back doing weddings. And then we were in England for 10 days with our daughter, Naomi, which was amazing. And so I just feel like I'm still living out of the suitcase. I'm afraid to unpack, but I promise you I still work here and we're locked in, all right? When we were in England, we spent most of our time in London, which is a walking city, which is just amazing. I love that. We spent a ton of time walking around, but you kind of navigate a little bit because they drive on the wrong side of the road. Now, thank you, yes. I didn't drive there, but even walking, you kind of got to get, I mean, just for safety's sake, right? Because here's what happens when I'm crossing a street here. You come to the street, instinctively, I just look left, right? Because we drive on the correct side of the road. And you look left, and if there's no cars, I will typically just kind of take a step, and then I'll look to the right to see if I'm good. But twice when we're in England, and I'm like, nothing, and I almost get trucked by a double-decker bus, like, right, because they drive on the wrong side of the road. But you also got to navigate that even with, and again, I didn't drive at all, but you even got to navigate that with walking on the sidewalk. Because when you walk on the sidewalk, what side of the sidewalk do you walk on? You walk instinctively on the right side of the sidewalk, and I'm walking down, and it's just like, I don't know if I should go left or right, and it's just this, you got to navigate the culture, and if you don't navigate the culture correctly, it can hurt you, all right? Hey, you're intuitive enough to know, and all of you this is true for, that walking the way of Jesus sometimes goes against the culture. All right, I'm not bashing culture, that's just the fact. And we started a series last week that's called The Gospel According to Daniel. And we're looking at this Old Testament book, Daniel. But there's a question that we're gonna bump up next to every week of this series, and that is this: how do I navigate a culture that sometimes, in some ways, pushes against what God calls me toward? Like, how do I navigate that? I'll put up a chart. If you got a Bible with you, the book of Daniel is where we're going to land. I want to encourage you to go there. Easy way for you to look, it's that far back in the Bible. But that applies to every single one of us sitting in here. I got to figure this out. If you walk with Jesus, right, I want to line myself up with the way of Jesus. You better figure out how to walk in a culture that sometimes pushes against the things that God calls us toward. If you said to me, yeah, but I'm not a Christian, I don't follow Jesus, that doesn't apply to me, it absolutely applies to you, because there are times in your life, this morning might be one of them, where God starts speaking to you, starts addressing, starts calling you towards something, and it feels, I'm not comfortable with this. Yeah, you know why? Because sometimes culture pushes against what God draws us toward, and we got to figure out how to do that. Caleb started this with us last week as he looked at the opening of the book of Daniel, and it is this strange story about a group of Hebrew young men who decide not to eat what the king set before them. If you sat down and in one sitting read Daniel, all the book of Daniel, it's 12 chapters, I've done it. And if you just sat in one sitting to read through all of that, there are some things that will pop out to you that you might not get if you just wait for, over a period of 4 weeks and we kind of walk through this. And one of the things that comes to the surface is there are a lot of dreams and visions in this book. I mean, like the last 6 chapters of the book of Daniel are Daniel's dreams. And it's like, okay, there's a lot of stuff. And when I say that, there's a thought bubble that is created over a lot of our heads that says not comfortable with that. Right? Where this whole thing about dreams and visions, and it's a little bit, we kind of get weirded out a little bit because dreams require interpretation. And once something requires interpretation, you get a bunch of different people chiming in, and you could go on Facebook posts and everything. People are all over the map on stuff. That's one of the things that kind of weirds us out a little bit. The other thing is that some of the visions and dreams that are in this book have to do with, here's the theological word, eschatology. That is the study of the end times. And we'll mention a little bit later this morning, but some of the dreams, visions that go on in the book of Daniel have to do with things at the very, very end, and that just makes us a little bit uncomfortable. What I want to do today is I'm just going to focus on the dreams because I think we miss one of the major themes that comes across in the dreams, and that is very helpful in you and I addressing how do I navigate living in a culture that sometimes pushes against what God is calling me toward. All right. What I want to do to do that is very quickly on the front end, I want to give you a 10,000-foot view of the book of Daniel. And I'll walk through this pretty quick. All right. The book of Daniel is underneath the events that happened under 4 kings. Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, his son, were Babylonian kings, all right? It's all in the same region. When Belshazzar died, Darius, a king, arose who was from the Medes. And then after him, Cyrus, who was Persian, became the king. Now, everything that happens in the book of Daniel, those 12 chapters, happens under 4 kings. Now, what I want to do on this chart up here is I'm going to put for you over these 12 chapters things that happen on the left side, and then dreams, visions, what's going on with that on the right side. And we're going to lay this out real quick. Last week, Daniel chapter 1, Caleb introduced it for us. And what you're going to see, the things that happened, there was this obedient diet, all right? These Hebrew boys who, by the way, had been kidnapped from their home, taken away in the midst of everyday life, and they get hauled off to go to Babylon to be indoctrinated, culturized, trained up. And this culture was very much in opposition to these Hebrew boys' faith. And so this is, listen, if there is a book that you can learn how do I walk in faith when the culture around me doesn't, the book of Daniel is where we're going to land, right? All right, Daniel chapter 1. You get this obedient diet, and then God steps in supernaturally and does some amazing things for them. That's Daniel chapter 1. Daniel chapter 2 then is this dream that Nebuchadnezzar the king has. I'm not going to go into a lot, but it is a dream about this tall statue that gets destroyed, and we'll take a little bit about that later on in the message. All right, we get back. Daniel chapter 3 is this obedient. I'm going to call it an obedient stand. Nebuchadnezzar builds a tall statue of himself and commands that everybody bow down to it. We're going to take a look at this next week. But these 3 boys, these young men, Hebrews, nope, we're going to stand, and God steps in this supernatural way to intervene. Daniel chapter 4, we go back to another dream that Nebuchadnezzar has. And he doesn't really understand it. This is a dream about this tall tree whose branches spread out, and everything under the earth dwells underneath in peace and security underneath these branches, and then the tree gets cut down. And Nebuchadnezzar is all, I don't know what this means. Check this out. So verse 24 and 25, you're going to see some themes, one in particular that is common among all the dreams, all right? Daniel interprets this dream, says this is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king. Hey, you're a king, but there is one above you who's the Most High. that you be driven away from mankind and your dwelling place be with the beasts of the field. Can you imagine the courage for Daniel to say that to the king? Oh, you're gonna dwell with animals in the field. You'll be given grass to eat like cattle and be drenched with the dew of heaven, and 7 periods of time will pass over you until you recognize that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind and bestows it on whomever he wishes. He is the boss of you. And it happens just like that. Hey, listen, you're going to go out and sure enough, Nebuchadnezzar, for 7 years, lives in the field. I mean, beard, wild man, eating grass on the field. And then verse 34 and 35, Nebuchadnezzar speaking after that says this, but at the end of that period, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven and my reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. Wow, that's like church talk. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, but he does according to his will in the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. That is a mouthful for King Nebuchadnezzar to say. I'm not the king of everything. And there's this theme that there is a dominion, there is a kingdom that will live forever. All right, chapter 5. Nebuchadnezzar dies. His son Belshazzar takes the reign, and he is a twerp. All right, he's pompous, he's arrogant, he's bratty. And so one evening, we have it in Daniel chapter 5, he throws this party. And it's just like, hey, what are we going to do? What are we going to eat? What are we going to drink? What are we going to drink out of? And they're looking for utensils to eat and drink from. And Belshazzar goes, I got an idea. Let's take the utensils from the temple in Jerusalem that we stole from there, that these Hebrew boys used to, all right? Let's take their temples and we'll just drink wine out of them. Right? They use these holy instruments for something very ungodly. And right in the midst of their party, a hand appears, like just a hand. And it starts writing on the wall. And Belshazzar reacted the way you and I would if a hand just appeared and writes on the wall, and his knees are knocking, and he's like, and he can't understand what was written on the wall. So Daniel gets called in to, what is this? We get this in verse 25, 28. Listen how this theme continues. Now, this is the inscription that was written, Daniel's words, that was written out. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. This is the interpretation of the message. Mene means God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Ooh. Tekel, you've been weighed on the scales and found deficient. You're not all that. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and the Persians. Again, quite a lot of courage for Daniel to say this. There's this dream, all right? Hey, there's another kingdom coming, and yours, not so much. And on that night, Belshazzar was assassinated by close friends. Daniel 6. We get one more pattern of obedience. You got the diet thing. You got the stand up and don't bow down. And then Daniel is this obedient prayer. Darius is now the ruler. And there was a rule. Darius was kind of tricked into this. There was a rule, hey, nobody can pray unless you pray to the God of Darius. And Daniel's like, not I. And he doesn't. And he goes ahead and prays, and he gets thrown into the lion's den. And once again, God steps in as a supernatural intervention. All right? Now that's it. That's all of the action of Daniel, the book of Daniel. So what's going on in the last 6 chapters? And that is he's got 3 dreams, visions that he has, and that's what we get. Let me just real quick. The reason why I want to look at these is because this theme continues that's in all of the dreams in Daniel. Daniel's first dream is he has this dream about 4 beasts, right? These 4, when I say beasts, I'm talking like, oh, don't mess with them. All right, verse 13 and 14, Daniel 7. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. That's a picture of Jesus, son of man. And he came up to the Ancient of Days, that's God the Father. and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom that all the peoples, all the nations, men of every language might serve him. His dominion, here it is again. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. All right? Verse 17 and 18, these great beasts, the four beasts, right, which are four in number, are four kings who will arise from the earth. But, and this is what every Hebrew young boy, young woman, every Hebrew man and woman longed to hear, and it was confirmed to them. But the saints of the highest one, I know you've been taken away from your homeland. I know some of you got taken away from fiancés. I know your job, you don't have it anymore. I know you hate the culture that you live in. I know all this. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, for all ages to come. You see the theme? All right? Daniel chapter 8, Daniel has a second dream. And this dream is about a ram and a goat that are just butting heads with each other. Bang, bang, bang. And we find out that the ram is the Medo-Persian Empire and the goat is Greece. Problem is, there's no resolution to this, right? All he has is he has this vision, and it's just bang, bang, bang. And it's not like in all the other visions, something comes along and destroys them. Not here. So verse 27, then I, Daniel, was exhausted and sick for days. I'm sick of seeing this ram and goat going at it, and we get no resolution here. Then I got up again and carried on the king's business, but I was astounded at the vision, and there was none to explain it. Daniel chapter 9, Daniel has this great confession. It's personal. If no other reason, read the book of Daniel for his confession in chapter 9, because he confesses on his own personal behalf, but he also confesses on behalf of the nation that he lives in. All right, and then Gabriel, an angel, is sent to teach Daniel some stuff. And then lastly, Daniel 10 to 12 is Daniel's third vision, and it is end times stuff. All right. Let me just read for you chapter 12, first 3 verses. For those of you that have read in the New Testament, Matthew chapter 24, that's eschatology stuff. The whole book of Revelation, that's eschatology stuff. And this sounds very much like that. There will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who's found written in the book, will be rescued. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but the others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. And those who have insight will shine brightly like the brightness of the expanse of heaven, and those who lead the army, the many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. And that's the book of Daniel. Now here's what I want to do. There's a theme that runs through all of the visions and dreams in the book of Daniel that I want to go back to Daniel chapter 2, and I want you to see it a little more up close. Because this helps people like you and I who recognize that, sometimes culture just pushes against, sometimes hard, sometimes offensively, sometimes it pushes against the things that God calls us toward. And how do we deal with that? All right. Daniel chapter 2 begins with verse 1, says this, now in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. He couldn't go to sleep because of these dreams. And that right there is why the book of Daniel is full of dreams. Like, why didn't God just send a prophet to tell and announce to these kings of Babylon and the Medes and the Persians? Why didn't God just send a prophet to say, hey, listen, your kingdom ain't lasting forever, and you better shape up? Why didn't he send a prophet? You know why? Because it's relatively easy to just ignore a prophet. You can't ignore dreams. How do I know that? Because if you're a parent that have had kids that are at least 8 years old, you've had that moment where it's the middle of the night and you feel them nuzzled up next to you in bed, or you hear them crying out and they come and they get in bed with you and they're terrified. I had a nightmare, it was awful. And you say to them, it's what? It's only a dream. No, it's not. Right? I mean, that helps maybe a little bit. They're still afraid. Why? Because you experience it. And Nebuchadnezzar, when he had this dream, he experienced it like he couldn't even go back to sleep. Not only did Nebuchadnezzar experience, Daniel in his dreams experienced it too. Check this out. Daniel chapter 10, verse 8 and 9. So this is Daniel speaking, I was left alone and I saw this great vision, yet no strength was left in me. Oh. For my natural color turned a deathly pallor, and I retained no strength, but I heard the sound of his words. And as soon as I heard the sound of his words, I fell into a deep sleep on my face, with my face to the ground. They're not just dreams. Like they grip you, you experience them, you feel things, you wake up and all of a sudden it's like, what is all this sweat in my bed, right? It's just like, And so like, these are powerful things. Now, Nebuchadnezzar, back to chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar had this dream, but he doesn't know what it means. And so he sends out to his people, I need an interpretation. And he sends out to what's listed as his magicians, sorcerers, and conjurers. Now that sounds very occult-ish, and it is. I mean, these are demon worshipers, and he sends out to them, I need an interpretation. But he's smart enough to recognize he knows what's going to happen. Because every little, hot-aired, sorcerer, magician, whatever, is going to come and say, I got an interpretation. I know what the interpretation, I know what that means. I know what that is. I know what that is. And so Nebuchadnezzar says, to test you, to prove that you really do have the recognition, you got to tell me the dream first and then the interpretation. Oh, pretty smart, right? Like, if you can tell the dream, I'll listen to you. And so here's what the sorcerers say, verse 10 and 11. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there's not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king, like what your dream is. Inasmuch as no great king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean. Moreover, the thing which the king demands is difficult, and check this out, and there is no one else who could declare it to the king except gods. They're kind of right. Whose dwelling place is not with mortal flesh. And Nebuchadnezzar is furious. Oh, I see. You're not all that after all. So he orders that all of them, all of these wise men, be executed. Well, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are included with that because there's wisdom there. And Daniel had interpreted dreams before. All right, so Daniel hears about this. Well, you know the character of Daniel. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So Daniel, chapter 2, verse 17 and 18. Then Daniel went to his house, and he informed his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now that's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, by their Hebrew names. And I love, this is one of the few times in the book of Daniel that they're mentioned by their Hebrew names. About the matter. Hey. So that they might request compassion from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Let me shorten that for you. They had a prayer meeting. All right, we better pray. And God, in fact, answered their prayer and gave Daniel insight into what the dream was, and then the king would then listen to him. Now, here's the dream. I'm going to put an image up here. In the dream was this statue. And the statue had 4 components. It had a head of gold. It had chest and arms of silver. It had a belly and thighs of bronze. And it had feet that were a mixture of clay and metal. And then there was this stone that came that crushed it, destroyed it. All right, so, okay, cool, that's great. Nebuchadnezzar said, well, yeah, that is my dream. What in the world does that mean? And Daniel reveals to him. Right, these are 4 kingdoms. All right, Nebuchadnezzar, you and the Babylonian king, that's the gold head. There's a kingdom that's coming after you that is the Medes, all right, Persia, that is the chest and the arms. There's a kingdom that's coming after that. That is the belly and the thighs. That's Greece. And then there's another kingdom that's going to come after that. And this isn't called by name, but that's the Roman Empire, right? That's the feet. Now listen,
And we get all wigged out on, well, what's the gold for? What about Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom? What about that was gold was so significant about that? And we talk about the Persian Empire and what's the silver? What does that mean? And all this kind of stuff. That's not even the point of the message. That's not the point of the dream at all. I'm not saying it's insignificant. I'm saying it's not the most significant. The most significant part of this dream is not this dumb statue. The most significant part of the dream is the stone that comes and crushes it. Because it says that it crushed it to the point that it was just chaff afterwards. You know what chaff is? It's like real fine dust that you can and it just disappeared. All those kingdoms, right? Babylonian, Persian, Roman, Greece, where all those kingdoms of no avail. Why? Because of the stone. And so, verse 44. What about the stone? What's the stone? In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. In the days of what kings? Well, the Roman Empire. When did Jesus arise? Roman Empire. In the days of those kings, he'll set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it itself will endure forever. There's your theme again. God has a kingdom that lasts forever. Let me give you a rough translation of what all these visions and dreams have. Your kingdom has been given to you. Nebuchadnezzar, you have a great kingdom. It is the preeminent. You are the head of the statue. All right, it's a great kingdom, but it's been given to you, and it too has a shelf life. It won't last forever. God's kingdom will never, ever, 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 ever end. Ever. Ever. I've been a couple thousand years because that's a long kingdom. No, we haven't even gotten started yet. It will never, ever end. And then how do you respond to that? All right. Hey, listen, that's a message for you too. Like, I don't know what your kingdom is. I don't know what you bank on. I don't know what what are you trying to build, right? Is it your business? Maybe your business is going great. It has a shelf life to it. Is your kingdom my friend base? And friends are important. Who do you call when things get tough? Who do you lean on when you need some advice? My friend base is really, really good. It has a shelf life. Your academic life, your athletic life, how many likes you get on social media, and how my Instagram is blowing up. Okay, it has a shelf life. And God's kingdom will never, 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 ever, 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 ever end. How do you respond to that? Here's how Nebuchadnezzar responded to this word. He could have just executed Daniel on the spot. Right? Here's King Nebuchadnezzar, verse 46, 47. King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and did homage to Daniel. I'll read that again. King Nebuchadnezzar, the kidnapper of these young Hebrew boys, the boss, the jefe, the everything that matters, he's sovereign, he's over everything, he's got this great kingdom, nobody wants to battle against Babylon. He bows and he did homage to one of his servant boys, to Daniel, and gave orders to present to him an offering. I'm sorry, you're going to offer sacrifices to this guy now. And fragrant incense, the king answered Daniel and said, surely your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, since you've been able to reveal this mystery. And that partly is how you and I navigate a culture that sometimes bucks up against the faith that you and I have been called to walk, is that we recognize that the culture that we live in also has a shelf life. But culture has a sway, but I serve a God who sways that. All right? Now, what's the gospel in Daniel? We've talked about this. This is the gospel according to Daniel. Where does Jesus show up in the book of Daniel? Well, hang with us next week. We're going to see that very obviously. But there's some other places as well. I want to give you 3 verses from the New Testament that speak to these dreams and how they relate to you and I, who try to navigate. How do we navigate a culture that sometimes pushes against what God calls us toward? 3 verses. First, Revelation chapter 19, verse 16. I love this passage in Revelation 19. It is the picture of Jesus at his coming when he's riding a white horse, and there's so much symbolic message in this. But I love this picture of Jesus, and here's what it says. And on his robe, on Jesus' robe, and on his thigh, there is a name written. Say this with me, all right? King of Kings and Lord of Lords. You know, one of the things I think you and I need to recognize, that there are things in culture, there are things in your day-to-day experience that are lords and they are kings. Like, they have a lot of sway. But again, I mean, with great degree of pride, I say that the Savior that I serve is the swayer of the things that have sway. He's the King of those kings. He's the Lord of those lords. He didn't just, Jesus' name is not simply the only King and the only Lord. No, he's the King of the kings, and he's the Lord of the lords. Matthew chapter 24, verse 42. Jesus is speaking here, and this is one of those eschatology passages. Matthew chapter 24, there's a whole bunch of stuff that Jesus talks about things at the end times. In that passage, he says this, therefore be on the alert, for you don't know which day your Lord is coming. Here's what the dreams told the kings of that ancient world, and here's what the dreams tell you and I today, and that is a day's coming. Hey, there's a day coming. I don't know what bosses you around. I don't know what has the sway in your life right now that you don't like. Can I just tell you something? Hey, there's a day coming. It might be that your literal boss, he or she, is just awful. Hey, there's a day coming. It might be that, I think back to high school. I started following Jesus when I was a sophomore in high school, and I know I graduated with over 600 people in my graduating class. I was the only Christian I know of in my graduating class. I know that's not true, but it felt so lonely. And sometimes you look at high school students, middle school students, sometimes you look at the people that have sway in your class, and you're thinking, I hate this. Can I tell you something? They're not going to be there forever. How do I know that? Because friends of yours that are in college right now say they don't have any sway now. Oh, it's a different group in college. Well, they're not going to have sway either. There's a day coming where Jesus, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, he's coming, and I better be ready for it. And if your kingdom is just great right now, that's irrelevant, because there's a day coming. Be ready. Then lastly, John chapter 19. This is during I'll just call it a trial. This is the questioning of Jesus by Pilate. And Pilate asked him a bunch of questions about the accusations that were brought up against Jesus, and Jesus didn't answer him. I mean, he answered some of the stuff, but he just didn't give lengthy or meaningful answers to Pilate, at least meaningful in Pilate's eyes. And so verse 10 and 11, John chapter 19 says this, Pilate said to him, Jesus, you don't speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you, and I have authority to crucify you? And Jesus answered, you would have no authority over me unless it had been given to you from above. Let me tell you what that means. 4 words. God alone is sovereign. That's it. God alone is sovereign. And I know the world we live in, it feels like things are sovereign. The sovereign governing of blah, 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 blah. God alone is sovereign. And we don't like that. All right? We just don't like it. We don't like the sovereignty of anything, and that includes God. Yesterday, Carmen and I were down in Savannah, and we were helping out with doing some stuff, and Micah, our son, and I were driving to the hardware store. And we're just talking about news stuff and things that were on the news and et cetera. And he asked me this pretty interesting question. He said, Dad, what do you think if you had no news feed and no social media input and you just accurately could see what was going on among culture, how do you think you'd describe it? And I just pondered for a second and I said, we are lawless without law. Because that's the way we want it to be. Like we are a lawless people. I'm great for laws as long as I'm in agreement and they benefit me, right? And if there's a law that you suffer a little bit but I benefit, here's a secret, I'm probably okay with that too. I love laws as long as it doesn't cost me anything. The problem is we don't like laws. I don't like anything being the boss of me. That's the story of the book of Daniel. Listen, you know how long the people of Israel, those Hebrew young men, young women, how long they were in exile in a culture that was very ungodly? 70 years. 70 years. I'm much older than I am. 70 years that they were persuaded, coerced, forced to worship other gods, do heinous things. It was awful, it was awful, it was awful, and it was exactly what Israel needed. I mean, this was under God's direction. He moved them like chess pieces, and he put them in exile for 70 years. Why? To recognize you are not the boss of you. And I'll put an awful boss over you for a bit until you recognize that God being the Lord of your life is the best thing. Now, how do you respond? Let me go back to verse 46 again. King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and did homage to Daniel. I don't want you doing homage to Daniel, but I do want us to do homage to the Lord. All right? Hey, all right. Jesus is the King of Kings. He's the Lord of Lords. A day is coming, and God alone is sovereign. Now, how do you respond? I pray. Lord Jesus, we're grateful. Thank you for the way that you drip out of the pages of the book of Daniel. And I'm grateful for that I can call you with all sincerity and truthfulness. You are the King of all kings, and you are the Lord of all lords, and you sway everything. Thank you that there is a day that's coming. You will set everything right, and I'm grateful that you alone are sovereign. And we thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, thank you all a ton.